here. And please share your story. What happened when you were younger, and how did you get on this wellness journey?
Well, as a kid, I had a pretty rocky road and experienced a fair amount of trauma. I mean, trauma is subjective, right? Everyone has their own degree of it, but the trauma that I experienced kind of set me off on a pretty rocky road in terms of just behavioral problems and eventually problems with law enforcement and just sent me
I can
sent
only
me
imagine.
uh, yeah, I at one point I had gotten arrested. I think I was like 14 and I got sent to this boarding school, and I learned later in life, actually quite recently, that it's since been shut down, but it was essentially like a cult boarding school. And so I went there for 2 years, and that kind of straightened me out and helped me with some of the healing from some of the things that I experienced in childhood. But then shortly after that, I moved to Hollywood, and I was playing in bands and being a musician and a waiter, and just fell really into alcoholism and drug addiction in a very meaningful way, and had a lot of problems as a result of that, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all the ways. And so by the time I was 26 years old, I had just reached a really hopeless place in my life, and was just profoundly unhappy and just dysfunctional in every way you can imagine. Just was not employable and was very close to becoming homeless. And so I checked myself into a treatment center, and luckily enough found the grace to be able to get into recovery. And when I did that, I started to also really work on myself physically. I kind of understood at first that finding a spiritual way of life and learning to meditate and aligning myself with 12-step groups and things like that were going to be imperative if I wanted to sustain my sobriety. But as I started to do that, I realized I was also just extremely toxic physically. I mean, this is over 10 years of doing really dirty drugs every single day and eating God knows what. Although, funnily enough, I was also, even when I was in the depth of my addiction, I also always took vitamins and drank green juice and went to the health food store and got smoothies and stuff. It's really funny, but I think that just both my parents, used to give me vitamins, and they took vitamins. They were kind of into alternative health and shopped at the health food store and stuff. So even though I was like living in the belly of the beast in Hollywood and running around all night smoking crack cocaine, I come to the next morning, go get a green juice to try to repent, but anyway, I got sober, and I just was so toxic. So I started doing infrared saunas and hyperbaric oxygen chambers, and making my own kombucha, and exploring herbalism, medicinal mushrooms, fasting, all of this kind of stuff, cold exposure. I used to go to like Russian spas and Korean spas and do like hot and cold therapy and things like that. And I started to slowly feel better. I became a vegetarian for a number of years, and thinking that would help me heal physically, although for me that actually exacerbated many of my physical problems. So I eventually outgrew that. But I was just trying anything I could to feel better. And while I was working on myself and getting into alternative healing, which is kind of now called biohacking, I was also deeply committed to meditation and practicing mindfulness and doing every personal development program and self-help book, and just really trying to get better to where I enjoyed my life and get to the point where I could have a positive impact. And so I did that, really up until now. It's been 25 years since I kind of turned my life around and made the focus of my life at first healing myself, just out of desperation and need to survive. And then eventually, as I started to feel better, I really started to implement more service into my life and started to see how rewarding it was to help other people. As someone who was, I think just by the nature of being in active addiction, I was extremely selfish and self-centered, and was very rapacious in my behavior, and was definitely not really, I mean, I was a caring person, but I was always looking out for number one because I was in a survival state. I was just in such a desperate state all of the time. So over those first few years, I started to see like, wow, when you think about other people and care about other people, you feel better, And so I started doing a lot of work in recovery, working with other addicts and things like that, and was very committed to my recovery program for many, many years. And I worked as a fashion stylist for that time, just someone who dresses celebrities. I was living in Hollywood, and spent my time during the day making people look beautiful on the outside, and spent the rest of my free time doing everything I could to feel better on the inside myself. And then eventually merged out of that career, as it wasn't really my true calling, and started the Life Stylist Podcast, as you mentioned, as you've been a guest, and have spent the past 6 years or so really sharing information that can help people heal on all levels. And so I oscillate between, exploring plant medicines and psychedelics and helping people heal emotional trauma, as I've done myself and continue to do, and then also just solving just pesky problems for people, physical problems, just things you can't get rid of, finding solutions for things that are kind of outside of the mainstream medical paradigm. Because in my view, and this has been my experience, that if you give the human entity, I mean, the body, mind, spirit, the correct inputs, and you stop giving it the inputs that are making it sick, magically it gets better.
Yes.
And so I
Yes.
think I really truly believe that anything can be healed. I believe absolutely in miracles. Just the fact that I'm sitting here today and I am not compelled in any way to do drugs or drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes or any of the things I used to do addictively and compulsively. Just that to me is proof enough that there are miracles and that someone can heal. And much of my journey and much of my healing has had to do with my spiritual life also. So while I'm someone that talks a lot about biohacking and things in the physical healing realm, I personally believe, because this has been my experience, that healing our emotions and healing our trauma and finding a connection to whatever sense of higher power is appropriate for us, that works for us, that we can learn to build faith in. I think that's the underlying foundation that's most important. And then all of the other, tools and tricks in terms of the biohacking stuff is kind of just icing on the cake. And in it, sometimes even for me, just kind of a fun hobby and a novelty to just see, like, oh man, just think, like, my knee hurts. What can you do about that other than going and getting a rod put in it or getting it replaced? Oh, wow, I could go see Joy Kong and get stem cells and probably be sorted out, so just, it's fun being able to fix the body. But I also know people that are chronically ill that have tried all of those things and it doesn't work. And in many cases, what has been at the root of those physical symptoms has been emotional trauma that hasn't been addressed. And so I'm all about, like, going at a holistic version of a person, the whole entity, their mind, their spirit, the way they think, the way they feel, their emotions, and the body. And I think if we approach things in a truly holistic way and not discard any of it, we can make a lot of progress. Just
Yeah.
likewise, I mean, you could meditate 10 hours a day, right, and get yourself aligned spiritually, and that's not necessarily going to fix dysbiosis in your gut if you have SIBO or something, right? So it's like, sometimes you do need a targeted approach for something physical, because the emotional and spiritual mental work you're doing is not getting to it. So it's not like one or the other. It's which is the best use of one's time in any given moment to achieve the desired result of vitality and longevity.